Maya Owens sat at her kitchen table well past midnight, the glow of her laptop casting long shadows across stacks of coffee cups and open lab notebooks. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of the city subway were the only sounds interrupting her concentration. She had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously perfecting her application to the Global Research Fellowship to fund her work on a low-cost water purification membrane for rural communities. Every section of her proposal had been honed. The literature review cited exactly 20 peer-reviewed sources. Her experimental timeline was backed by preliminary bench-scale data, and her budget request was itemized down to the dollar. At precisely 11:47 p.m., she clicked Submit and watched the progress bar fill in reassuring segments of green. When the final bar lit up, "Your application has been received," she expected at least an email confirmation. Instead, the page simply redirected back to her own application summary with no banner, no reference number, no timestamp. Just the button labeled Submit, waiting ominously for another click. She frowned, reloaded the page. Nothing changed. Shrugging off her rising unease, Maya switched to her email tab to look for an automated "Thank you for applying" message. She refreshed her inbox twice, then a third time. Nothing. Even her spam folder remained barren. She reached for her phone to call her department's administrative assistant, who had connections at the Fellowship Foundation. The call went straight to voicemail. By 12:15 a.m., Maya's initial disappointment had curdled into frustration. She returned to the Fellowship website's FAQ page, searching for any mention of delayed confirmations or system outages. The site offered only generic advice. Allow up to 24 hours for email delivery, but nothing about a missing submission. She drafted a polite follow-up email. "Dear Fellowship Committee, I submitted my application for the Global Research Fellowship at 11:47 p.m. on January 14th. I did not receive a confirmation email. Could you please confirm receipt? Sincerely, Maya Owens." She hit send, then leaned back in her chair, head spinning. It was 12:22 a.m. before she heard the soft whoosh of her email client sending the message. She closed her laptop, feeling a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The thought that her months of work might have vanished into a digital void was unbearable. As she lay in bed, sleep eluded her. Every 10 minutes, she checked her inbox on her phone, willing a reply to appear. By 3 a.m., the empty inbox glared back at her, mocking her with its silence. She sat up, wrapped her blanket tighter, and stared at the ceiling. If the Foundation truly had lost her proposal, there would be no chance of reconsideration. She realized then that her application wasn't just an email. It was the culmination of her career's work so far, and without confirmation, it might as well not exist. Just before dawn, Maya's frustration crystallized into resolve. If the system had failed her, she would refuse to fade away quietly in the silence of a vanished email. Tomorrow, she vowed, she would make sure someone heard her voice, no matter how many times her application slipped through the cracks. That evening, unable to sleep and still seething over the missing confirmation, Maya returned to her laptop with a fresh determination. She opened a new document and began composing what she would later call her Midnight Manifesto. She started by summarizing her own ordeal in vivid, honest terms. The hours spent poring over scientific journals, the careful calculations underlying, her budget spreadsheet, and the crushing anticlimax when the Fellowship website swallowed her submission without so much as a thank you. She described in plain language how opaque application processes and disappearing emails disenfranchised not just her, but thousands of dedicated researchers whose voices went unheard because of bureaucratic black holes. Next, she broadened her critique to the systemic flaws in research funding. How decision committees too often favored big institutions with polished branding over grassroots innovators working on high-impact problems. How lack of transparency bred suspicion and wasted talent. and how an entire generation of early career scientists risked disillusionment when their proposals vanished into the void. As she typed, Maya's frustration sharpened into moral urgency. She cited concrete examples: a postdoctoral colleague whose vision for low-cost diagnostics had stalled under repeated technical error rejections, a community lab in Detroit whose seed funding evaporated without explanation, and the hundreds of public petitions for application status tracking that had languished ignored. She wove these anecdotes into a call to action. If the fellowship foundations would not ensure accountability, then the research community would hold them to account. By 2 a.m., the manifesto had taken shape as both a blistering indictment and a rallying cry. Maya concluded with 7 clear demands: real-time submission tracking. Every applicant must receive an immediate verifiable confirmation number, viewable on a public dashboard. Transparent review timelines. Foundations must publish projected review dates and update applicants on any delays. Blind review with feedback. Peer reviewers' comments should be shared with applicants, anonymously if necessary, to foster improvement. Appeal mechanism for lost applications. Any applicant claiming non-receipt should trigger an independent audit of server logs and manual review pipelines. Open data on funding decisions. Aggregate statistics on acceptance rates, demographics, and research fields must be published annually. Dedicated ombudsperson. A neutral advocate for applicants, empowered to investigate complaints and recommend policy changes. Community Oversight Board. A rotating council of early career researchers to advise on fairness and inclusivity in grant processes. Maya formatted the document with clear headings and bullet points, then added a personal sign-off. I stand ready to work with any foundation that shares these values, but I refuse to remain silent in the face of systemic failure. She saved the file as a PDF, and with a trembling hand, attached it to emails addressed to every major scientific mailing list she could find, from discipline-specific forums in environmental engineering to broad academic networks like ResearchGate. She also posted the manifesto on Twitter and LinkedIn, tagging the foundations whose application portals had swallowed her work, as well as influential science communicators and policy advocates. In one final step, she tweeted a link to a Google Doc, inviting colleagues to add their own experiences of lost proposals and to upvote the demands they thought most urgent. At 3:17 a.m., Maya hit publish on her personal blog and watched the page go live. Moments later, her phone buzzed with the first notifications: a retweet from a prominent open science advocate, a sympathetic "I've been there" from a colleague overseas, and a surprise message from a senior researcher at another institution offering to amplify her call. As exhaustion crept in, Maya leaned back and exhaled. The Midnight Manifesto was now out in the world, an unflinching spotlight on the hidden injustices of grant-making, and a declaration that she would not be silenced. Whether her fellowship application reappeared or not, she had found her voice, and it would echo far beyond the inbox that had once failed her. Within the hour, Maya's Midnight Manifesto ignited a storm across the scientific community. Her inbox, once silent, now overflowed with messages, hundreds of emails from fellow researchers detailing their own tales of vanished applications, committee rejections with no feedback, and months lost in bureaucratic gray areas. Simultaneously, the Google Doc she'd linked began to fill with hundreds of entries. One by a climate scientist whose grant for novel carbon sequestration technology disappeared without a trace. Another by a PhD student in South Africa whose funding request to expand rural healthcare diagnostics never produced a confirmation number, and dozens more, each story a variation on the same theme of institutional opacity. On Twitter, her hashtag, #InboxVanished, trended within 2 hours, propelled by retweets from prominent figures in open science advocacy and policy reform. Science journalists pounced. Leading outlets published articles headlined, "Fellowship Applications Lost, Is Your Research Next?" and "Outrage as Scientists' Proposals Disappear into Digital Ether." The foundations that Maya had publicly named issued lukewarm statements, apologizing for technical difficulties and promising investigations. But their stock phrases rang hollow against the avalanche of first-hand accounts flooding blogs and listservs. On Reddit's ER Science Forum, discussion threads erupted, with thousands upvoting Maya's manifesto and debating the need for systemic change. Meanwhile, funding committees found themselves besieged by media inquiries and open letters demanding explanations, leading one major research council to suspend its next application cycle pending an internal audit. By the end of the day, the narrative had shifted. This was no longer about one lost email, but about a broken grant system that desperately needed transparency and accountability, an issue that Maya's bold midnight intervention had thrust into the global spotlight. That Tuesday morning, a steady stream of graduate students, postdocs, and early career researchers poured onto the plaza in front of the National Science Council's monolithic headquarters. By 8 a.m., the cold air was thick with scarves and protest signs as more than 500 marchers, women and men in lab coats, business casual slacks, and hooded sweatshirts, milled before the polished granite steps. At the center of the crowd, Maya Owens stood on a folding crate-turned podium, her voice amplified through a borrowed PA system. She opened with a clipped, resolute tone. "We no longer ask for transparency. We demand it." Behind her, students held banners reading "Our Research Matters," "No More Black Box Grants," and "Where's Our Fellowship?" The clatter of boots on stone echoed as delegations arrived from universities across the state, their chants building in synchronized waves. "Accountability now! Accountability now!" Inside, the council's executive board convened in the Oak Room, its high ceilings frescoed with allegorical murals celebrating the sciences, astronomy, biology, engineering, while outside the protesters' drumbeat grew heavier. At 9, a group of student marshals led a delegation to the entrance, 6 representatives carrying a stack of printed Midnight Manifesto copies tied with a red ribbon. Uniformed security officers blocked the revolving doors, but the students formed a human chain, linking hands to shield the ribboned booklet as they pressed it against the glass. As the doors remained closed, a hush fell over the crowd. Maya raised her megaphone. "We are here to occupy this plaza until the Science Council meets our demands for real-time tracking, blind peer review with feedback, and an appeals process for lost applications." Her words were met with cheers and a spontaneous chant, "Open the doors! Open the doors!" By mid-morning, the protesters had orchestrated a peaceful takeover of the building's forecourt. Volunteers formed committees. One coordinated a rotating schedule of speakers to keep energy high. Another distributed thermal blankets, hot coffee from a nearby cafe, and homemade sandwiches. A third documented the action via live video feeds, streamed to global science forums. The campus occupation was not an ad hoc gathering, but a well-planned effort. Flyers handed out days before had instructed participants on nonviolent demonstration and emergency contacts. At noon, the first council official emerged, flanked by aides and clutching a phalanx of press photographers. He peered at the makeshift encampment, blankets spread on the plaza, laptops open for petition signatures, chalked squares marking discussion circles, where volunteers debated next steps. He raised a microphone to his lips, voice trembling slightly. "We recognize your concerns and invite your representatives inside for a dialogue." A surge of applause greeted his words. Maya and 2 fellow advocates, one a PhD, candidate in marine microbiology, the other a clinical researcher in rural health diagnostics, stepped forward under the watchful gaze of their peers. As they crossed the threshold, the assembled crowd pressed closer, their united presence a testament to collective will. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere shifted from formal decorum to urgent negotiation. Maya began by presenting the occupation's non-negotiable demands: a public audit of the fellowship application server logs, immediate implementation of blind review protocols with mandatory reviewer feedback, and the establishment of an independent, Appeals board staffed by early career researchers. Her colleagues supported her with data drawn from the crowdsourced Google Doc, highlighting dozens of lost application cases and systemic trends disadvantaging small institution applicants. Council members, some wearing expressions of defensiveness, others of reluctant respect, engaged in hushed consultation before the council chair. Dr. Amelia Hart cleared her throat. "We will grant an immediate audit of the application platform and publish its results within 30 days, she announced. "We commit to piloting blind review with feedback in our next cycle, and we will establish an independent appeals committee by the end of the quarter." As the council's concessions were read aloud into Maya's megaphone at 2:00 p.m., the plaza outside erupted in triumphant cheers. Protesters embraced, high-fived, and broke into celebratory chants of "Transparency now" and "We won't be ignored." Volunteers passed out hot cocoa to warm, chilled hands, while a group of students played a spirited tune on a borrowed acoustic guitar, an anthem of solidarity resonating through the city streets. By late afternoon, the occupation wound down. Maya addressed the crowd one final time. "Today, we showed that our voices, when united, can crack the hardest doors. We will hold the council to its promises, and together, we will remake the system to serve all researchers, not just the privileged few." A collective cry of "Open science now" echoed across the plaza as the participants dispersed, eyes bright, spirits unbowed, and a global movement forever strengthened by their bold, peaceful occupation. Under the glare of midday spotlights, the National Science Council convened an emergency press conference in its sprawling atrium, glass walls overlooking the plaza where Maya's occupation had unfolded. Reporters from every major scientific journal and news network filled the tiered seating, microphones clustered in front of the podium like an open-mouth chorus. Behind the lectern stood Dr. Amelia Hart, the council chair, flanked by the vice chair in charge of grants administration and the newly appointed ombudsperson, Dr. Annika Rao, a former awardee of independent fellowships and vocal advocate for transparent review. Dr. Hart cleared her throat and began with a measured apology. "On behalf of the National Science Council, I offer our sincere regret to all applicants whose proposals were lost, delayed, or inadequately reviewed during our last fellowship cycle. We acknowledge the systemic failures exposed by Maya Owens's courageous advocacy and by the community's collective voice." A ripple of appreciative murmurs pulsed through the assembled crowd. Cameras zoomed in on Maya, seated in the front row alongside student and postdoc representatives, her expression a blend of relief and vigilance. "Dr. Hart continued, effective immediately, we are implementing the following reforms: application audit and public report. We have located and retrieved every misplaced or lost application from the past 2 cycles. A comprehensive audit report detailing server uptime logs, submission timestamps, and manual entry records will be published on our website in full by the end of this month. Real-time submission tracker. Starting next week, every applicant will receive a unique application ID and access to our live status portal, showing each stage of review from submitted through in committee. Blind peer review with mandatory feedback. Our new system will anonymize applicant identities and require reviewers to submit structured feedback reports addressing strengths, weaknesses, and suggested improvements for every proposal they assess. Appeals and Ombudsperson Office. We have established an independent appeals committee led by our ombudsperson, Dr. Annika Rao, to adjudicate claims of lost applications or unfair reviews. Applicants may request an appeal within 30 days of receiving a decision. Annual Transparency Dashboard. Beginning January 1st, we will publish aggregated data on application numbers, acceptance rates, reviewer demographics, and funding allocations, disaggregated by discipline, career stage, and institution type. As Dr. Hart read each point, an aide handed Maya a printed copy of the reform document. She caught Maya's eye and offered a respectful nod. Reporters fired rapid-fire questions. Will you retroactively fund proposals lost during the last cycle? Dr. D. Rao stepped forward, voice steady. Yes. Every retrieved application will be reassessed under the new blind review protocols, and funding decisions will be expedited. Applicants who narrowly missed funding will be considered for additional discretionary awards. How will you ensure server reliability going forward? The Vice Chair, Dr. Marco Liu, answered, We've contracted with an external IT auditor to implement a mirrored server architecture with automatic failover and real-time backup. Our systems will now feature redundant data centers to prevent any single point of failure. Will reviewers face accountability for biases or unconstructive evaluations? Dr. Rao replied, Reviewers who fail to provide substantive feedback or who exhibit patterns of bias will be removed from the reviewer pool. We're instituting annual reviewer training on unconscious bias and evaluation best practices. By the end of the hour, the council's reversal was complete. Cameras clicked and lights dimmed as the press scramble died down. Maya joined Dr. Hart and Dr. Rao at the podium. With a calm, resonant voice, she said, Today we've witnessed that collective action and principled advocacy can compel institutions to live up to their missions. I thank the Council for these reforms, and I pledge to work alongside the research community to ensure they are fully realized. Applause echoed through the atrium. Outside, on the plaza, the last of the student-led tents were being packed away, yet the energy of the movement remained palpable. The boardroom reversal had not only restored Maya's missing application, but had rewritten the playbook for equitable, transparent science funding, proving that systemic change, once thought impossible, can be realized when voices rise in unison and demand accountability. In the weeks following the Council's landmark reforms, Maya Owens and her collaborators transformed their victory into a sustained global movement. Open Science Now. What began as a single manifesto became a multi-phase campaign reshaping research culture worldwide. Founding the coalition, Maya convened an inaugural summit in Washington, D.C. at a rented civic center. Over 3 days, more than 300 participants, early career researchers, open access publishers, data scientists, nonprofit leaders, and representative delegates from 20 national science agencies, gathered to formalize the coalition. In plenary sessions, working groups drafted the Open Science Charter, codifying principles of transparency, inclusivity, and accountability in funding, publishing, and peer review. Maya oversaw the Governance and Ethics Committee, ensuring representation from under-resourced regions and integrating feedback from over 2,200 public comments submitted via an online portal. Establishing regional chapters, Open Science Now launched regional chapters on every continent. In Nairobi, the Africa chapter partnered with local universities to translate the charter into Swahili, Arabic, and French, organizing workshops on grant portal literacy for early career scientists. In São Paulo, the Latin America chapter collaborated with government agencies to pilot open peer review platforms for climate change grants. Each chapter elected co-chairs, always one senior advocate and one postgraduate researcher, to balance experience with fresh perspective. Global Policy Advocacy. Meanwhile, the Policy and Legislation Task Force, co-led by Maya and UK-based science policy expert Dr. Aidan Chen, drafted model legislation for transparent grant-making. They lobbied the European Parliament, US, Congress, and the Indian Ministry of Science and Technology, providing template bills requiring real-time tracking of all publicly funded research proposals, mandatory reviewer feedback, and universal appeal rights. By the next fiscal year, 4 national governments had enacted versions of these laws, mandating open data compliance for all funded projects. Open Access Publishing Initiative. Recognizing that paywalled journals hindered knowledge sharing, Open Science Now partnered with leading open access publishers to create OSN Press, a nonprofit platform subsidized by philanthropic grants. OSN Press offered fee waivers for researchers from low-income countries, and its innovative peer transparency model published reviewer reports alongside accepted manuscripts. Within a year, OSN Press had published over 2,500 articles in fields ranging from nanotechnology to public health epidemiology, accelerating citation rates and cross-disciplinary collaboration, education and training. To instill open science values at the grassroots level, the coalition rolled out OSN Academy, an online learning portal. With over 50 modular courses covering topics like designing transparent study protocols, ethical data sharing, and constructive peer feedback, the Academy registered 100,000 learners in its first 6 months. Certifications from OSN Academy became recognized credentials for grant applications and hiring packages, incentivizing researchers to adopt best practices. Measurable impact. By the end of the second year, Open Science Now's annual Transparency Index report, co-authored with independent auditing firm Clear Metrics, documented a 45% reduction in lost applications among participating funding bodies, a 60% increase in published reviewer feedback, and a 30% rise in cross-institutional grant collaborations. News outlets hailed the movement as the greatest advance in research equity since peer review itself. Through meticulous organizing, strategic policy engagement, and inclusive capacity building, Maya Owens and Open Science Now turned a single, missing email into a comprehensive global reimagining of how science is funded, evaluated, and shared, proving that bold action infused by community solidarity can spark enduring systemic transformation. 2 years after a single missing email sparked a movement, Maya Owens stood at the lectern of the World Research Summit in Tokyo, her presence the culmination of Open Science Now's global transformation. The summit's main hall, its vaulted ceiling crisscrossed with steel beams and soft lantern lighting, was packed with ministers of science, leading university heads, and young investigators who had once hidden their proposals in fear of bureaucratic oblivion. Maya began with a measured breath. "Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends," she said, voice carrying across the hushed auditorium, "today we gather not merely to celebrate scientific discovery, but to honor the principles that make discovery possible: transparency, equity, and shared responsibility." Behind her, a panoramic screen displayed the Open Science Charter's 7 pillars, now adopted in policy or practice by over 50 nations and dozens of major funders. She narrated the arc of the movement, how a vanished fellowship application led to an open letter manifesto, how a peaceful occupation catalyzed institutional reform, and how the founding of Open Science Now forged regional chapters in Nairobi, Sao Paulo, and New Delhi, each tailoring the Charter's principles to local contexts. She highlighted measurable impacts: a 50% drop in undisclosed proposal losses, a 70% rise in constructive peer feedback published alongside articles, and the creation of OSN Press, whose open access platform had disseminated critical pandemic response research worldwide. Maya's tone shifted from retrospective to aspirational. "Our journey demonstrates that the integrity of science depends on more than data. It depends on the dignity of every researcher, from the lab in rural Kenya to the lecture hall in Cambridge." She unveiled the summit's final declaration, the Global Open Science Accord, a binding commitment by signatories to extend the Charter's principles to emerging fields such as AI ethics, climate model transparency, and genomic data sharing. The hall erupted in applause as Maya concluded, "Let us ensure that no researcher's voice is ever lost to the void again, and that every idea, no matter how humble its origins, can find the light it deserves." Delegates rose to their feet, flags of their nations waving in greeting of the accord they would imminently sign. Later, as Maya toured the summit's exhibition floor, greeting delegates, reviewing poster sessions on open data pipelines, and advising young scientists, she reflected on how far the community had come. What began with one lost application had grown into a movement reshaping the very foundations of research culture. The principles she and her colleagues championed would endure, ensuring that science remained a collaborative, transparent endeavor, accessible to all who dared to ask questions and seek answers. As the day closed with lanterns illuminating the Tokyo skyline, Maya looked out at the city, its lights symbolic of myriad investigations unfolding in labs and offices around the world. In that luminous panorama, she recognized the true legacy of her movement, a research landscape forever changed, where no application would vanish unread and where every bold move, however small, could spark a global wave of progress.